One of my favorite bands, and not the Grateful Dead, was Pink Floyd. The Wall, which was one of the best known concept albums, which I think sold somewhere around 30 million copies, is the second best selling album of Pink Floyd, behind The Dark Side of the Moon. And the best selling double album of all time, and one of the best selling albums of all time overall. Bassist Roger Waters conceived The Wall during Pink Floyd's 1977 In the Flesh tour, and modeling the character of Pink after himself and Pink Floyd's former songwriter, Syd Barrett. The Wall is a rock opera that explores abandonment and isolation, symbolized by a wall. Pink is a depressed rock star, and he imagines a crowd of fans entering one of his concerts, and a flashback of his life up to that point begins. Now, in the flashback, it's revealed that the father was killed during World War II. Pink's mother raises him alone, and with the death of his father, Pink starts to build a metaphorical wall around himself. Now, growing older, Pink is tormented at school by abusive teachers, and memories of these traumas become metaphorical bricks in the wall. Now, as an adult, Pink remembers his oppressive and overprotective mother. Pink soon marries, and after more bricks are created through more trauma, he is preparing to complete his wall. Now, while touring in the United States, he is wanting casual sex with a woman to relieve the tedium of touring. Though in making a phone call home, he learns of his wife's infidelity, and he brings a groupie back to the hotel room only to trash it in a violent fit of rage, terrifying her out of the room. Now, depressed, Pink thinks about his wife and feels trapped in his room, and he dismisses every traumatic experience he has ever had as even more bricks in the metaphorical wall, while rejecting human contact and medication. Now, Pink's wall is now finished, completely isolating himself from the outside world. Now, immediately after the wall's completion, Pink questions his decisions and locks himself in the hotel room, beginning to feel depressed. Now, Pink turns to his possessions for comfort and yearns for the idea of reconnecting with his personal roots. Pink's mind flashes back to World War II, with the people demanding that the soldiers return home. Now, returning to the present, Pink's managers and roadies have busted into his hotel room, where they find him unresponsive. Paramedic injects him with drugs to enable him to perform. Now the drugs kick in, resulting in a hallucinatory onstage performance where he believes that he is a fascist dictator and that his concert is a neo-Nazi rally at which he sets brown shirt-like men on fans that he considers unworthy. He proceeds to attack ethnic minorities and then holds a rally in suburban London, symbolizing his descent into insanity. Now, Pink's hallucinations then ceases, and he begs for everything to stop. Tormented with guilt, Pink places himself on trial for showing feelings of an almost human nature before his inner judge orders him to tear down the wall. And this is the opening of Pink to the outside world. Now, the album turns full circle, hinting at the cyclical nature of Waters' theme, and that the existential crisis at the heart of the album will never truly end. Now, The Wall is a fictional story, but has plenty of things that can be relatable to musicians. Substance abuse being one, being pushed to keep going when your body is exhausted and needs to stop. Now, please stay tuned for our special guest, Ryan Dusick, who was the founding drummer for Maroon 5. You don't want to miss this.
Trapped in a tree, arcade nightmare, taunted by clouds, climbing Everest without a rope, life without a meaning,
Okay, welcome back to High Wall Clean. My name's Eric McCoy. Hey, I want to remind everybody that we highly appreciate your support. So please just subscribe, like, do all those other things that our technological world asks of us. The music industry, mental health and substance abuse, and actually we could probably end the show there. Any questions? We've had numerous guests on the show, and the most common career that we do see is a musician. And I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, Ryan Dusick, who was the founding drummer of Maroon 5. They released their debut album, Songs About Jane, in 2002. The album peaked number 6 on the Billboard 200 chart, went quadruple platinum in 2005. In the same year, the band won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist. Now, Ryan released a book, I guess last year, titled Harder to Breathe. And the story takes you on the journey of success, obviously the demands that come with it, as well as his struggles with anxiety and addiction after he left the band. And Ryan had a major struggle that he faced. He was a drummer and unable to drum due to nerve issues that he had. And Ryan, I want to thank you for coming on our show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I was saying earlier, before we got started, I mean, you got a very interesting story that you obviously had a job and potentially unable to perform the job and sort of forced out of the industry. And I was thinking about this. I mean, I was just kind of trying to wrap my brain around, obviously I'm assuming that this was a big dream of yours to be a musician. And then to hit a place to where you were unable to do it and sort of forced out of it. How did that feel for you?
Well, you have to remember this was a band we started when I was 16 years old in my parents' garage. And it was the original 4 members, Adam, Jesse, Mickey, and myself. We worked for a decade to get to that point, struggling and striving and doing everything in our power to make our dreams come true. And finally they did. Finally we reached that summit that you dream of being a headlining act and having a platinum record and winning Grammy Awards and all that stuff. Just as we were reaching the apex of that, I had to walk away from that career. And it wasn't just walking away from career, it was really walking away from everything that had become my self-definition. My entire identity was wrapped up in being not just a member of the band or the drummer in the band, but, a part of that group of friends and creative team and the whole, social world that was centered around the band and those guys and everything that we'd worked for since we were teenagers in high school, dreaming of that to the point where we were at. So it was devastating. It was heartbreaking. It really knocked me down to my core, just feeling really defeated, feeling like a failure. I went through, I think, a grieving process, going through the stages of a grief to deal with that loss of identity. I was really depressed. I started self-medicating more and more. And it was a process I had to go through. It was something that took time for me to find closure.
And how was and obviously somebody took your place in the band. And how was the band for you? I mean, were they a lot of support for you?
They were supportive, absolutely. And I suppose, when you hear about stories about bands breaking up or somebody leaving a band, it's usually this horrible thing, and it wasn't that. But it was, I think, there were a lot of subtleties to it, a lot of nuances. I think, we were all in our 20s, so you can imagine the level of emotional I don't want to say maturity, but just, the ability, emotional presence, ability to really be there for somebody else. I think it was a difficult situation that nobody really knew how to deal with, let alone me, myself going through it. Sure. I couldn't even express my feelings to anyone or let alone ask for help or anything. So how could your friends really truly be there if you're not opening up to them? So it was complicated, but we were able to stay friends and in time become closer again. But we went through a really difficult time. And you can imagine also for me, just even going to events where all those guys were at, or going to shows, was deeply triggering for me, because that was where like my trauma was, and it was, I would want to go and participate in their lives and have fun the way we used to, but it would start out that way, but it would end up with me, basically wasted and in the fetal position crying by the end of the night, so it was like, it was complicated to say the least.
Yeah. Are you able to drum now at all, or?
Currently it's not easy. I've gone through different sort of cycles with drumming. That's the one place in my life. Everything else has really turned a corner and been really positive. And I'm in a place of purpose and meaning and fulfillment in my life and doing what I'm doing now. But the drums and music were, once my greatest passion, but also my greatest pain. So I carry some of that baggage with me, even though I've done my best to work through it and the kind of therapies that I've done. But it's interesting, the psychology involved with this stuff, because I couldn't play the drums anymore. I had legitimate physical issues, but really, now that I look back on it, it was something you call musician's dystonia, or focal dystonia, which means that your body, you've put it through so much stress doing something repetitive under high pressure circumstance, that it finally just says, like, you can't do this anymore, and you develop like a reflex to it, where you can't do that action anymore. And actually, when I quit drinking, that improved to a certain extent. I was playing about as well as I had in a decade a few years ago. But then I don't know, I had certain situations where I imagined like performing again or playing with the guys again, and then that thing got worse again. So it's like, it's kind of a trauma response, and again, that's like the one area where I still carry, some of that baggage. I'm just being honest about it, because, that's what I'm here to do.
No, absolutely. So now you're a therapist. So obviously, when all that happened, so I want to go back for a second again. Due to all those demands of being a musician and show after show after show, probably, and being pushed to a level of insanity in a sense.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as, what happened was the intersection of a lot of internal pressure that I put on myself with the growing external pressure of success and all the demands that came with it. Because I was a high achieving kid growing up, and excelled in a lot of things that I applied myself to. And weirdly enough, I didn't get a lot of external pressure from my parents, like, you have to perform, you have to achieve. But I put a lot of pressure on myself. I held myself to a really high standard. I became very perfectionistic. I could be self-critical. I could be, I even became a sort of obsessive compulsive about certain things, and that played out a little bit in terms of my intensity with the drums. And so I had this predisposition, I think, for some of the internal pressure, as well as anxiety, it's something I think that runs in my family. But for me, it manifested in some different ways at different points in my life. But it wasn't until we were in the midst of this huge campaign, for world domination as a band, and touring all over the world. And you combine the kind of intensity I had as a person, and the anxiety and the pressure I put on myself, with now having to perform night after night on bigger and bigger stages, one tour after another. It was relentless. There was just no end to it for basically 4 years of our life on that album. And it wasn't something that happened one day or one night. It just built up over time. And really what it was my whole constitution really kind of breaking down. I look at it as a nervous breakdown, just like my nervous system gave out on me. That's not a clinical term, but it's just a good way of sort of describing, just the buildup of the pressure and the stress, and then eventually the breakdown that occurred.
I read somewhere that you wanted to be a baseball player. Is that true?
Yeah, that was one of my first dreams and passions. I was a pretty good pitcher when I was 12 in Little League. We won the championship and all that. And I had dreams of pitching for the Dodgers growing up in LA. And I think in some ways it could have been realistic. I was definitely excelling in that. But I ended up with arm problems in high school. It really mirrors kind of what happened with the drums, what happened with me with baseball in high school. That's why I put it in my book, Harder to Breathe, because I mean, baseball is neither here nor there for if you're a fan of Maroon 5, but it's kind of sets up the story because you see what I dealt with on a smaller scale with baseball as a teenager. It kind of comes, it foreshadows, what comes later with the band and on the road on a much bigger scale.
So, okay, so now let's go back now. So now you're a therapist.
Yeah, right.
And that's pretty cool. I'm actually I work in the substance abuse field myself. I'm a counselor. I've been doing it for 20 something years. And so you decided to go to school, obviously after you left. And a question, how long did it take you for you to finally let go of, and how did you do that? How did you let go of that?
Well, it was tough. I spent about 10 years in my, pattern of addiction, self-medicating and trying to make the painful feelings go away or escape them or avoid them and all the things we do, which of course worked for a night or two and then made it worse. And it got worse over time. And at the end of it, I'd gotten to a place where my anxiety was at the worst it had ever been in my life. I was really depressed and isolated, and physically it was taking a toll on me, all the drinking and everything. And, kind of hit a spiritual bottom, where I just realized that I wanted to rejoin the living. The way that I was going, it was just going to keep getting worse until I died. So if I wanted to, live a life that was at all fulfilling, I needed to start walking in the other direction. It was humbling, extremely humbling to get to that point, feeling so low. And I started out at the Betty Ford Center out in the desert down here in Southern California. And what happened for me was early in recovery, even when I was still dealing with intense anxiety and coming off of both the alcohol and some medication that I was on, that was just left my nerves completely frayed. I discovered service, as a way to counteract that. It was a powerful thing to realize that even like 2 weeks into my stay in rehab, that I had something to offer another human being that was helpful and meaningful. Just somebody's doing worse than I am that's, shaking like a leaf walking in those doors, and I can help them with their bag and show them to their room and acclimate them to the process that we're all going through, realizing that somebody had done that for me 2 weeks earlier and that it had helped me, and I felt more comfortable after they did that. And so that was just like a light switch went on for me, realizing, all of the things I'd been doing to avoid my problems had also kept me from realizing that I had the ability to have connections like that in the world, to people and to life. And it was felt more meaningful than anything I'd been doing in my addiction for years. So I kind of just followed that feeling. Once I was out of rehab, I was at an IOP, an intensive outpatient program for a little while, where I volunteered for 2 years after I finished that program. And I was just, helping people that were getting started in recovery, offering support, listening to them, telling them my story. And it was just so meaningful and fulfilling to do that. And I was getting a lot of positive feedback in terms of my ability to be, to articulate the ideas of recovery, but also to be empathic with the newcomers, that it just started to seem like it's a no-brainer to do this at a higher level, find a career in it. If it's already something I'm volunteering to do and I have the, educational background to go back to school and get a degree, like this could be something great. So I did that and I applied, and I just kind of did the next indicated action, which was going back to school to get a master's degree in clinical psychology, thinking I would probably just do what you're doing, going and becoming a drug counselor or working at a recovery center. But, it kind of opened up my horizons, and I found a lot of different areas that I could see myself working in. So I'm not working specifically in the addiction recovery world, but I am working with people that are struggling with anxiety, depression, trauma, and of course, substance use or abuse comes into all of that, with a number of my clients. So it all kind of comes together in what I'm doing now. And being a therapist, I bring everything that I've learned personally in my life into the work that I do.
Yeah. Now, were you doing a lot of drinking when you were in the band, or was it mostly afterwards? And were you doing drugs too, or was it just alcohol? I don't say just alcohol, but
Well, it was kind of like this. I was actually kind of late to the ball game. I was a good kid who didn't mess around too much. I took my parents' advice to stay away from drugs and alcohol as a teenager. In my 20s, I started drinking recreationally, and it was at the early stages, the romantic stages of alcoholism, where it was all just fun. It was just something to facilitate the good times, get out of my head, and not be so anxious and self-conscious. And it worked for that time. And then I took that onto the road with me. And during that time, I did drink, not to the point that I would say that it was totally toxic. I mean, I would say, I would tie one on when we had a night off, or I don't really remember being drunk on stage or hungover on stage very much. But that being said, I can look back and say it wasn't necessarily the best coping mechanism, because the amount of stress that we were under and the amount of toll that it was taking on my mind and body, you're then just putting that much more stress on your mind and body by putting that toxin in you as a way to just check out. So it probably made things worse, but it didn't really escalate to the point of being full on, a real problem until, I lost the thing that had been my self-definition and fell into this space that felt like a deep void. And for the first time, drinking became a way to escape, not to facilitate good times, but to medicate, to numb out completely, or to seek oblivion, And that's when it got really bad for me. And it escalated pretty rapidly after I left the band. But I went through all the stages of addiction where, I convinced myself that I had it under control, and kind of went through that little phase of feeling like I was getting my shit together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that if I just, drank like a gentleman and all that stuff. Of course,
our hats are off to you.
Yeah, exactly. But no, there were some other drugs involved. I tried all the little games in the insanity of addiction. At a certain point, I added pills to try to curb the drinking, right? Mm-hmm. Going to my psychiatrist, talking about my anxiety, and doing that little dance between the medication and the self-medication. Of course, it all just made it worse in time, and it escalated and became an even more complicated problem.
So you got this book out, and so what's the premise of it?
Well, this book, Harder to Breathe, it was something that I toyed with the idea of writing probably 10 years earlier, when I was still in the depths of my suffering. Actually, somebody even approached me and wanting to maybe co-write it or ghostwrite it for me. And at that time, I said no, for a couple of reasons. One, if I was going to write a book, I was going to write it myself. Mm-hmm. I had a degree in English from UCLA, and I had always had a dream of writing novels. So I figured I'd write my own book. But also, I just, I didn't see what the purpose would be at that time, because I knew I had an interesting or unique story to tell in terms of the band, and it was sad, heartbreaking, ending the way that it did. But, what would the purpose be? Just woe is me. This is what I had, and this is what I lost. So I didn't write a book at that time. I was in no condition to. But when I was in grad school getting my degree in psychology, I was in a really good place, really inspired, and feeling like my education and my understanding, not just of mental health and psychology, but also of myself and everything that I went through, was reaching a whole other level. And it just kind of came to me one day that I had this story to tell that now had a happy ending. It was something that could actually be purposeful, not just for me in terms of sort of a narrative therapy for me, but also to inspire other people that might need to hear this story of hope and recovery. So it just started coming out of me, and it became like a mission. And I realized I wanted to do the best I possibly could to be really honest and vulnerable in the writing of it. And that, hopefully some people would relate to the things that I struggled with. And if they can relate to the things I struggled with, then hopefully they can relate to my recovery.
Yeah. I think you have a powerful story, but it's easily relatable, to anybody. I mean, it's substance abuse, mental health. It is all about loss. I mean, it can be loss of sanity, loss of meth was my killer in life. And I would say it was honestly my first true love in life. Mm-hmm. It was one of those things. I started young. It was always there. It was there to comfort me. It was never let me down, kind of thing, until eventually it did let me down. But and I think honestly that a lot of us will deal with that loss for the rest of our lives. The substance, the choices I made, I lost my family, I lost my friends, I lost, money, I lost my credit, my health. And so the only way that I was able to gain the losses back was I had to let go of the thing that really meant something to me. You had to let go of something, that meant something really, heavily to you for you to find your life.
Yeah, I think I really had to mourn those losses. And in a lot of ways, I think, to get sober, you have to go through a grieving phase with your substance, because as the way you described it is very accurate. It's like a one true love, but it's a relationship that starts out romantic and it's meaningful to you and it's the answer to all of your prayers. And eventually over time that relationship becomes toxic.
Yeah.
And just like any relationship that ends, you still have those memories of the things that may have been your saving grace at one point in your life. And you have to kind of mourn the loss of that, because for better or for worse, it was a big part of your life for a long time,
Yeah.
And it's like, who am I? I mourned that identity, that I lost as the drummer in Maroon 5 and that whole thing. But I think your identity as a drinker or a drug user, like that's wrapped up in your whole sense of yourself.
Yeah.
And so when you enter that new stage of recovery, for a moment there, it's kind of like, who am I if I'm not that guy?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about when you were saying that with your career, I've been in the substance abuse industry. There's two things I know: how to sell dope and how to be a counselor. I don't know what else I would do, if I lost that, right? Everybody gets clean and sober because of pain. Something painful happens, for people to get clean and sober. Now, eventually that pain goes away, and we have that part of the brain called the amygdala, which stores that emotional memory.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the cravings, that a lot of people have always resorts back to like when I first did it, the times when it was wonderful, because that pain, that's why we always say don't glorify or glamorize it, because, that sort of puts us back. And I was kind of curious on that with your music. Does that same similar idea apply with your music?
Well, I've come to a place where I think for the longest time while I was in my addiction, my relationship to music was extremely complicated, and it was hard for me to remember when music was pure and innocent fun and inspiration and passion, because it was wrapped up in so much pain and trauma for me, so I think that I've been able to come to a place of closure on that chapter of my life enough to go back and recognize all of the good times. And I've been reliving them, and I've really been cherishing them and realizing how special that time in my life was and how grateful I am to have been able to participate in what we did, because it was a really magical thing. I mean, you kind of take it for granted a little bit when you're in the middle of it. You don't know it's the good old days when you're living them, right? But we started this band, and it was just such an innocently inspiring tale of these guys in a garage at 15, 16 years old, dreaming the biggest dreams you could possibly imagine and going out into the world and actually achieving them. And when people ask me, like, what do you miss about that? The first thing that comes to mind is not the success. It's not the incredible famous people we met or the things we got to do at the end of my time in the band. As much as some of those things were wonderful, it's the process that I miss. It's the camaraderie between us and the magic that would happen when we were either playing together or writing together, and something would break through and something would happen and we felt that synergy. That's the stuff that I miss. That's like you can't bottle that up. You can't create it and anticipate it. It's just something that happens every now and then, if you're lucky enough to catch those moments either by yourself or with a collaborator of some kind or a group of friends. So that I'm just so grateful at this point in my life to have been able to been a part of that and to create that. And I cherish those memories. They come with, at the same time, the pain of how it ended. And there's definitely trauma from that I mentioned earlier, and I have to continue to work through that. It's part of, the stuff that I carry with me, but it's just, I try to look at it as but also from all that pain came all the things I've gained since then. If it weren't for that, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. I wouldn't have these stories to tell and the ability to hopefully touch people and reach people that need to hear a message that I have to offer.
Yeah. And you're probably, and I don't obviously know you, on a personal standpoint, you're probably a fantastic person and everything. And, I look at with my life with substance abuse is there's nothing I've ever done that makes me who I am, but it did help shape me. And I can say I love who I am today,
Sure.
and I wouldn't want to change anything. And I did a lot of horrible things and bad things, but I would not want to change anything. You had an experience that a lot of people will never have that opportunity. A lot of people dream of, and that will never find themselves, and I'm sure that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate and very blessed for everything that has happened in my life. The other thing I try to remind myself all the time, and I talk about this with my clients, is, there are pros and cons to everything in life. And had I not had the problems I did as a drummer and continued to be the drummer in Maroon 5, there would have been some big pros to living that lifestyle for another 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it would be. I'm sure I'd be a lot richer. I'm sure I would have had some more memories of incredible things we got to do. But I'm sure that there also would have been some cons that I avoided in terms of, I know even doing it at the level that we were doing it for a few years, the monotony of that. The touring and just playing the same songs over and over again and getting to that point where you're feeling like, what, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. We're just kind of hashing out these shows one after another. I know how that lifestyle, as glamorous as it can seem, and as much of the perks that come with it, there are definitely downsides to it. The loss of your privacy, for instance, and then just the relationships. Would my relationships with the guys be the same if I had been in the band this whole time? I don't know. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. All I know is that my life having gone the direction that it did, there are some big pros that I wouldn't have had otherwise, and yeah, I lost out maybe on some opportunities in terms of financially and otherwise. But you take the good with the bad, and you try to look at the opportunities that life gives you. The pathways that open up to you. And if you look at them in that way, and you're able to recognize something that is a gift, then you're always going to be grateful for wherever your life takes you.
Yeah, I personally would say that comparatively to that life versus what you do today, you bring a lot more value to the world. Music's great and everything, but and I feel this way too, and that what I do and what you do, I don't think, I think the value that we bring is way above and beyond anything that you could ever bring with music, by putting our hands out, by helping people and the feelings that brings.
I agree. And I say that a lot. And sometimes I have to kind of check myself, because I do recognize that, that album in particular, Songs About Jane, that we made, touched a lot of people. And I still get people coming up to me or, writing me on social media or whatever, talking about how special that music was for them, and going to see our show or whatever, how meaningful it was for them. So, writing that music, recording it, putting it out into the world, and playing and performing definitely has a meaningful impact on people. But the difference is that I'm helping people one-on-one or in groups, speaking in a really tangible way in terms of working through issues that might really be the difference of life and death for some people. It might be the difference between, really struggling and thriving in life. And so seeing those changes in people up close and knowing that you can have that impact, I do think that it is even more meaningful, and that for me, the rewards are even greater, in terms of just feeling like, I'm in a different place in my life too. I was in my 20s when I was doing that. And of course, the validation of having that success and stuff was meaningful. Now in my 40s, what I'm putting out into the world, is more meaningful to me than what I'm getting back,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think the fame really played a lot into stuff? Because you being in your 20s, you guys hit big fame. Here's a whole shitload of money, that you have. I don't even know if you had the ability to truly comprehend and understand how to manage finances, which happens, destroys a lot of bands, but and a lot of people. But do you think that played a lot? Here's a shitload of money, and then of course with all the demands that are put upon you, do you think that had a lot to do?
I don't think that the money or the fame contributed to my downfall in terms of the breakdown I had on the road. Certainly the pressure and the stress of all the demands on our time and energy month after month on the road, that contributed to my breakdown. But I think that the success that we had and everything that it became definitely was a detriment to me, a blessing and a curse, when I found myself with a whole lot of free time, not a lot of responsibilities, and now a drinking problem, and feeling really sorry for myself. You know, it's a position in life that we all dream of, to have enough wealth to not necessarily have to go get a day job. You know, that's what we all are hopefully working towards at some point in our life getting to experience. And I was experiencing it at 28. So it sounds like a dream, and in some ways it is. But when you're feeling absolutely broken inside and don't have any responsibilities you have to live up to, or wake up and, you know, show up at a job, or I had the time to show up to family events and stuff, and plan out my month so that I could appear like I had my stuff together. You know, it contributed, I think, to the extent to which I was wallowing, and just kind of it enabled my ability to stay in that state of self-obsession and denial and reliance and dependence on a substance to moderate my emotions in any way. So it was definitely detrimental in those ways.
So let me ask you, I always like to ask this question. If you were to give a message out to somebody who's struggling, who's really struggling, what would you tell them?
Well, I think the mistake we do make sometimes as friends or family members of somebody who's struggling is to try to fix them right away, to try to say, here's what you need to do, give them advice, or because that's like the last thing you want to hear. And it's probably the most likely effect of that is defensiveness, right? Mm-hmm. I think the first step is to come to someone from a place of empathy and compassion, and to ask questions, to allow them to express what it is that they're experiencing, because what they're experiencing, it has to be so profoundly painful for you to be continuing to live that lifestyle. I mean, when you watch a show, it's amazing to me when I watch a show like Intervention or something like that now, and you see these people that are in the midst of their struggles, and people are offering them help, and they still can't accept it half the time. And you're like, what is wrong with you? You just want to shake them and just like, come on, man. Like, there's no reason why you have to continue to live this way. But it makes you remember just like how much you're stuck in this loop and how hard it is to see yourself getting out of it. And really, I think allowing someone to really express to you what it is that they're going through and have some compassion for it, what they're struggling with, because it's not just a drug that they're struggling with, right? Like, that's the extreme that it gets to in terms of the dependence. Yeah. But they're medicating something, some kind of trauma, some kind of pain, something deep down inside that is driving this. So that's the first step for me, is to really try to understand.
Yeah, it's kind of you get a lot of people in the industry that try to convince people that they're addicts or alcoholics, and it's something that I'll never tell anybody, because me saying it doesn't mean anything, Kind of the principle too with the like motivational interviewing, helping people resolve that ambivalence, but it's about getting them to acknowledge the change that they need to make.
Yeah, I mean, reflective listening is a big part of motivational interviewing, right? And it's just like repeating back to someone. It's amazing how much that works. It's one of the first things I learned as a therapist. Is like, when all else fails, just repeat what the person said back to them. And half the time they're astonished, and they're like, oh my God, you get it. Because like no one takes the time to really understand what you're going through. And all we want a lot of the time is just to feel heard, feel seen, And so sometimes just asking the right question, or just saying, so what you're saying is that you feel this way because of this. And it's exactly what the person just said, but it's like, oh my God, you understand. That's a powerful tool.
Yeah. Sometimes, they're not looking for an answer.
Yeah.
They just want that ear.
Yeah. Connection. That's the thing, is that, we've heard that addiction is a disease, is a spiritual malady, and what's the opposite of that? It's connection, feeling connected to something outside of yourself. Addiction is so isolating. So even if it's just a human being that you feel understands you, that's a spiritual connection. That's feeling like, oh my God, there's something outside of this little world that I'm stuck in that has meaning. And that's why it's so powerful to find a higher power of your own definition, whatever that is. But for me, it was like connecting to people that are going through the same thing as me, or people that have gone through the same thing as me, and that I can see their recovery as a possibility. And so, yeah, I mean, just any way that you can find a connection, something that brings like that spark, remembering that there's more to life than this hole that you're in.
Yeah, that story of hope, that it is possible. You went through that, and look at you today, a fucking therapist.
Yeah, can you imagine that if you told me 10 years ago that I would be helping people? I wouldn't believe you.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy. Well, hey, man, I want to really thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
All right, well, hey, I want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of High Wall Clean. As I always like to say, keep getting high, but let's do it clean. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Hey, but we are not done yet. This interview continued for our radio show on Hot Topics, which is on Johnny Rock and Roll Radio. This episode aired on March 11th, and the topic of the radio show was negative self-talk, inner critic. And so let's continue on with that.
Hey, I got a therapist who is going to join us briefly, and who just happens to be the founding drummer for Maroon 5. So we got Ryan Dusick here, and I thank you, Ryan, for helping us out. I want to tell our listeners that you can hear his amazing story of his rise to fame. Obviously, what goes up must come down. He was forced out of the music industry because of nerve problems and unable to perform his job, which was play the drums. So he lost his mind, found booze to comfort him, and then decided to seek happiness, enjoyment in life. Am I kind of on the right track?
Yeah, yes, basically.
And so he became a therapist and wrote a book to help others find it. Okay, so we have been talking about that critical voice, and I was curious on what that critical voice was telling you when you were going through all this stuff.
Well, I was really hard on myself as a kid growing up. Nothing was ever good enough. I had to excel and achieve, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to do that constantly. And so when you're on the road and performing night after night on bigger and bigger stages, and the demands are getting greater externally, there was a moment when that internal pressure that I put on myself met up with that external pressure. And I think that what I started telling myself, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, when you tell yourself the negative enough times. I was telling myself that I'm going to fail, that basically I can't hack it. I'm breaking down. There's something defective in me, and I'm bound to be a failure. Now, that was just a fear of mine, right? Of course, it wasn't reality. It was just a fear that I had, but I was obsessing about it and ruminating on it, and telling myself more or less that was what was going to happen. And I don't know, if that was ultimately what created the problem, or if it was part of the problem. But certainly, if you tell yourself something enough times, you start to believe it, right? But the opposite is true, right? And if you tell yourself the positive thing enough times, you start to believe that as well. So it's really just a matter of replacing those negative thoughts with positive ones, with affirmations, with talking to yourself the way that you would your best friend or your loved one or your family member. If you were, trying to be supportive and helpful, you would never talk to them the way that we often talk to ourselves. Oh, you idiot. Why'd you do that? Oh, you're going to screw this up. You would say, oh, that's all right. You're doing great. Keep going. You're going to overcome this. And so finding a way to talk to yourself in that way, to be your own cheerleader, it makes such a huge difference.
It does. And, as I say, our mind doesn't know the difference between what we tell it and things we experience, which is also why we can lie to ourselves over and over and start to believe our own lies. And it is one of the most common things that I see, especially with a lot of the people that I work with, is, a lot of people grow up in families too, where parents tell them those things. You're stupid. You'll never amount to nothing. And they continue to hold on to these internal voices, that just keep, and positive affirmations are definitely something that I know is probably the best tool for overcoming those. And is that something that you did a lot when you were kind of working through a lot of that stuff?
Yeah, I had to definitely change the way that I talk to myself. I think when I was in the years after I left the band and I was self-medicating and feeling really sorry for myself, anything that I could see as good in my life always came with some harsh criticism. And but when I was able to quit drinking and start that whole new journey, I started to realize that the confidence that I once had and had lost was still there as long as I was treating myself kindly. I had been treating myself so unkindly for so long, so it made sense that I was down in the dumps. But once I started treating myself with more self-compassion, with more self-love, and that has to do also with self-care. If you're putting poison in your body or you're really neglecting your basic needs in terms of diet and exercise and sleep and all those things, you're basically treating yourself without a lot of love, right? So, in every way, mind, body, and spirit, giving myself more love, giving myself that compassion that I needed, led to more confidence, and which led to me, going out into the world and doing things that were more purposeful, and that gave me more of a sense of meaning and fulfillment. So it all kind of feeds on itself and grows in the same way that you can be in a downward spiral, as it continues to kind of just fester. You can create an upward spiral. Just by doing some nice things for yourself and treating yourself with kindness, it turns into more positivity in your life.
Yeah. So now you're completely clean and sober.
Yeah, almost 7 years now.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
And you feel good.
I feel great. I mean, I wish that obviously you say no regrets. That's but I wish I could have that decade back when I was not feeling so great. But you live and you learn, and I'm in my 40s now, and I feel great. I feel healthy. I feel positive. I feel inspired to do a lot of things in my life, and I'm going out and just kind of doing the next indicated action every day, taking allowing that to take me wherever life takes me. And so I feel wiser, for having gone through all of that. And if I could go back and do it all again, I'd probably do some things differently. But I'm using that all of that growth and everything I've learned from it to live this part of my life in the best way I know how, and pay it forward. Really just try to be of service to others that might need to hear some of the things that I've learned.
Yeah, and it feels good to see people succeed.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's why we do it, right? Sadly, we lose some, but.
Yeah.
Especially with everything that's going on today, but it's those successes that keep us moving forward.
Oh my God. I mean, when I was in early recovery, I was volunteering at a recovery center for a couple of years before I went back to school to get my master's and become a therapist. And that was so inspiring to me. Where else do you get to see somebody, and not all of them, but some of them come in at the lowest point in their entire life, and in a matter of months, all of a sudden you see the light bulb go on.
Yeah.
And they're seeing life in a different way. There's a positivity, there's a brightness, and they're thinking more clearly. They look healthier. Their spirit has been rejuvenated, and their relationships are improved. I mean, like everything is just gelling. Yeah. And when you see that happen, it's like, man, that is so magical, and it inspires you to want to really be grateful for the ways in which your own life can have all those things. I'm doing a lot of telling my story as much as I can, and trying to be an advocate, both in terms of mental health and in addiction recovery. I just feel like what I've gained, and having whatever platform I have, given my background and what I'm doing now, it's both a passion and a responsibility, I think, to be of service in that way.
I want to thank you for doing this, man. I really, really appreciate this.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate you having me on. It was a good experience.
Finding